welcome to the Morning Prep Podcast. We've got a minute because the kids haven't started to line up yet. I'm your host, Nathan Van. So we've all been there. The quarter is coming to a close, and you're getting emails from your coach or principal about the number of kids that are failing classes. Could be your classes, could be other teachers' classes, but you're getting this endless onslaught of emails. Now, you think everything is fine until you check out your own gradebook, and then you start to see that the number of Fs and the number of near Fs come to the double digits. So you ask yourself, how did it get so bad? What did you miss? Essentially, why are students failing my class? Now, before we dive deeper into this episode, just a quick word from our sponsor. So thank you for taking a moment just to listen to this little sponsored pitch. What we're going to be focused on for this little ad is something that you may not have heard of, which is Anchor.fm. Now, truth be told, have you had that killer idea for a podcast? Then Anchor.fm is your way to go. So what makes Anchor so good is the fact that it, first and foremost, it is free. That's actually what attracted me to it in the first place, was the fact that it was a zero financial investment. But the second piece is that there are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. So if you don't want to fiddle with any sort of like GarageBand or Traction or Waveform or any other recording program like that, I only named the ones that I knew off the top of my head, then you can do it right through the computer, right through your browser. Also, what Anchor likes to do is distribute your podcast for you, so you can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many, many more. What also makes it phenomenal is the fact that you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. All right? No minimum. So you can start making money immediately. Now, the thing is that it is everything that you need to make a podcast in one place. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm and get started. So this week's drink is just a simple glass of water. I'm not doing anything fancy this morning, just doing something cool and refreshing. So with this week's episode, we're going to be diving into what the failure rate of your class is an indicator of and how it should allow you to really focus in on the quality of your practice. So the truth is that is a hard statement to swallow. The whole reality of the rate of the number of students with Fs in our class and how it rates to our quality as a teacher. But the truth is, the sooner that we get comfortable with understanding that, the sooner we can begin to improve our teaching and overall engagement with students. So this comes to my mind for a number of reasons. First, currently, that's the battle that we are waging against in our school, is the failure rate. As everybody knows, and as you read in the news, you see very clearly that failure rates are up across the nation in this COVID environment, specifically in schools that are remote learning, much like all Chicago schools or most Chicago schools currently are. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out what are ways we can combat that. Now, again, there's the aspects of it where you think about it and it's on the kids. The kids are just not doing the work because they're learning something completely new and completely different. They're trying to survive in this very new way of learning. Kids aren't, and I think about my own experience learning remotely or learning online. It's that it requires a mindset shift. And so there is this aspect of students are just struggling because that they're just trying to adjust with this new way of teaching. But the reality of this as well is that as a teacher, there are things that you are doing or are not doing that is causing that failure rate number to increase. And so I want you guys to begin to think about that. Now, just a personal aside of when I realized that this failure rate story, this failure rate idea becomes so much more important than just this COVID time, but largely as a matter of practice, is because in my early years of teaching, I had a ridiculously high failure rate. I'm talking about 50%. About half of my kids were failing. Now, I wore this as a badge of honor. This is a point of shame right now for me, but I'm sharing this with you all to kind of illustrate a point that I wore it as a badge of honor. I deceived myself into thinking and into simply believing that my class was just really hard and rigorous, that students had a hard time passing my class. I mean, obviously, it's my stuff must be so difficult that only the best and the brightest are able to succeed in my class. And so I tricked myself into thinking that I was honestly doing right by kids by making it so difficult to pass my class. But what I found out was that I was just completely wrong. I was completely off base. And so as we dive into this and as we think about this a little bit further and a little bit deeper, the first thing that I want you to consider is what are some of the reasons why kids fail classes? So the simple ones come to our mind, such as they didn't show up, they didn't do the work, they didn't study for the test, they didn't read your feedback and try to improve. Now, there are many other reasons why students fail classes. I mean, there's also, again, students have personal lives, they have lives outside of school, and things go on and things happen, and tragic things happen too that take students' focus away from education and focus on themselves and focus on their family, and rightly so, because we do the same thing too when tragic things happen. And the truth is that all of these are valid excuses and reasons for why kids fail classes. However, there is something that we cannot forget. Our students are still kids, and they still need training on how to be independent and how to take ownership for their grade. Again, I'm going to say this one more time. Our students are still children. They need to be trained on how to be independent and how to take ownership for their grade. Now, some students, they have this down. They know what to do. They know how to do it. They don't need you to walk them step by step through a task, reminding them about it either. They got it. Again, you know who those kids are. You know who those kids who are always knocking on your door, asking to make up assignments, asking to do work. Like they'll have like a 97% and they'll be asking to make up an assignment from 3 weeks ago because they got a 90 instead of a 100 on it. And you're scratching your head like, just be satisfied with the 97%. You're passing. You're doing better than anybody else. But those are the kids that in this context, you don't need to worry about. You don't need to think about because they pretty much have mastered how to take ownership of their own grade. They've mastered to one extent how to be independent learners. All right, we're not talking about them. Most of your kids are going to need help and they are going to need support. I don't need to tell you that. So before a student earns an F in your class, these are the things that I really want you to think about and consider. These are four big questions that come to mind. The first one is that were the parents aware well before this was a possibility? All right. Were the parents aware that the students were doing poorly or were failing before it was a possibility for them to actually earn the F? The parents are part of the learning community, and they deserve to be in the know. They allow their child to be in your class, so you owe them that much to keep them in the loop with how their child is doing. So again, were they aware? Did you talk did you talk home? The second question is, did you provide opportunities for students to remediate? All right, did you give them that chance to make up work, to learn the skill again? Okay, think about your own job as a teacher. Are you only ever given just one opportunity to do your job right? Or are you given multiple opportunities to fix a mistake and to improve the next time? All right, the real world offers second and third chances, and so should your classroom. So again, did you give students a chance to make up the work? The third question is, did your lessons, did they provide adequate opportunities for students to practice and learn the skills intended? All right, this is pretty self-apparent. Like you can look through your own lessons. Did you just cover a skill once and then test them on it like a month later? All right, if you did that, then you got to reconsider that because you're not doing kids a service. All right, think about the greatest baseball players. I love baseball. It's one of my favorite sports to watch. It's one of my favorite sports to play. They don't become the top of their game because they just take one swing of the bat and they knock it out of the park. All right. And they don't get kicked out of the league for taking one swing of the bat and popping out. All right. They're given multiple opportunities across every single level to improve their game and improve their practice and become better at what they do. They don't just kill it in the first time and they get that major league contract. Or if they're on a major league team, they don't just fail in their first at bat and then they're just kicked out of the major leagues. They're given opportunities to continue to learn and continue to grow. Did you give your students those opportunities to learn and grow on the skills that you're teaching them? The fourth question is, do your assignments accurately measure mastery of the standard or the skill that was taught? In the end, grades are simply a reflection of the mastery of the skills and the content that was taught. If the assignments that you created do not do that, and this is especially true for major projects and assignments, then you need to reconsider if that student truly failed your classes. So I'm going to repeat these questions just for, again, to help them stick in your brain. Were the parents aware of the possibility of their child failing? Did you provide opportunities for students to remediate? Did your lessons provide adequate opportunities for students to practice and learn the skills intended? And did your assignments accurately measure the mastery of the standard or the skill that was taught? The grade a student earns has significant amounts of power. You hold an immense responsibility when you grade assignments. You hold an even greater responsibility when students have those grades show up on their report cards. It is not something that should be done flippantly. The grade a student earns impacts their GPA, which influences the kind of college they can get into or the kinds of scholarships that they can earn. A grade may seem like a simple matter to you, but the implications of them are far greater than they seem. For those of you that teach in the elementary school as well, those grades influence the kinds of high schools that they can go to, the kinds of options that are open and available to them. Are they open to are they able to get honors classes or AP classes? Their GPA influences that. So you are opening doors and closing doors based upon the grade that they earn in your class. And you need to think very carefully over the kinds of decisions that you're making when it comes to grading, okay? So I want to just really stop for a moment and just think about this in the context of Lord of the Rings. Now, I love this reference. I may be kind of shoehorning this in a little bit just because I love it so much, but it really goes over one of my favorite quotes in the entire series. And so this makes me think of like when Frodo is telling Gandalf, it's a pity Bilbo did not kill him in reference to Gollum. Gandalf's reply really shows us these little details that come to matter so much. Gandalf says, "Pity? It is pity that stayed Bilbo's hand. Many that live deserve death. Some that die deserve life. Can you give it to them, Frodo? Do not be too eager to deal out death in judgment. Even the very wise cannot see all ends. My heart tells me that Gollum has some part to play in it, for good or evil, before this is over. The pity of Bilbo may rule the fate of many." Now, again, I love this quote so much. It really just lays out, it's a massive piece, because this happens in the Fellowship of the Ring, the first book of the trilogy, and it's just a massive piece of foreshadowing for the entire text. Like, it's something that about 1,000 pages later that you end up hearing about again, and your mind kind of hits it again, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And then you learn to love Tolkien that much more, and you learn to read more of his works, because again, he's a phenomenal author. But the key in this is to remember that the actions that we may deem inconsequential may have a much greater impact than we will ever know. Again, we hold the future in our hands. We are future makers as teachers. So let's not make the mistake of undervaluing it. Let's not make the mistake of simply forgetting like, oh, hey, you know what? I'm grading this assignment and all these kids failed this test. Is it possible that there's something wrong with the assignment and not me as a teacher? You need to reduce your ego for a little bit. Again, being a teacher, like it's very easy to get stuck in that world of ego and really thinking like you're the greatest thing on earth and you're the best teacher ever. All right. We all have room for growth. We all have room for development. The sooner that we grapple with our ego, the sooner that we can really do what is best for kids and really change outcomes for students. So your homework in this is I want you to look over your grade book. And I want you to read the name of every single student that is earning an F. And I want you to consider the questions that were asked. Again, I'm going to repeat them just one more time so they're stuck in your mind. Were the parents aware of this possibility of their student earning an F in your class? Did you provide the opportunity for students to remediate on the assignments? Did your lessons provide adequate opportunities for students to practice and learn the skills intended? And do your assignments accurately measure the mastery of the standard or skill that was taught? So after reviewing that, if you can answer yes to all of those questions, you should feel comfortable as you can, at least, with a student earning that grade because you tried. You put your best foot forward. You try to contact your parents and you try to get them involved in their child's education. You try to give that student every opportunity to be successful. All right. And in the end, like you scaffolded, you stepped up to the plate And the student more or less at that point was not willing to receive the training that you were giving them and chose failure in that instance. Again, there's always those extenuating circumstances. All right. And we're just going to put those over to the side for just a moment. But the truth is, if you have trouble answering yes to all of those questions, then honestly, reconsider the grade. Many of you are closing out your grade books right now. So this is the perfect time to be doing that. Again, at the end of this week, my school is going on winter break. Okay. The grade book doesn't close for another couple weeks after that. So a lot of our teachers have this opportunity to really do that thorough dive into their grade book and really think about this. And I want you, if you have that opportunity, do the same thing. Take that time, think about every single student. Do not forget the context of COVID. Okay. This is that real world application. For those of you that are teaching remotely, it is absolutely imperative that you consider these questions. Our students are struggling now more than ever because they are not used to learning as independently as they currently are. This is an added layer of stress that we need to consider. We need to be willing and able to show grace in the same ways that we ourselves as teachers hope to receive. And thinking about this outside of the context of COVID, because again, this is just a universally applicable thing, is that our students are still going through things. All right. They're still having to grapple with things. If you teach in an urban school and you know anything about your students or about where they live or what they have to go through to make it there, then you need to be willing to show grace. I'm not saying give up on them. I'm not saying make life easier for them, but you need to be willing and able to more or less go the extra mile for them. I knew a kid, if you know anything about the city of Chicago, the city of Chicago is, it's a pretty big city, and there's certain central areas. I worked in a school in Lincoln Park. So it's a very centralized neighborhood. It's pretty close to downtown Chicago. I had a student that would come from 119th all the way to Lincoln Park. And he took public transportation. If you take public transportation from 119th Street all the way to Lincoln Park, that is about an hour and a half, almost 2-hour commute, depending upon the route that you take. All right. And the fact that he did that day in and day out to come to school for his education, it was one of those things that put me in awe, and it allowed me in my own mind to recognize, I need to be a little bit more flexible with this student. I need to recognize that, you know what, he might not be able to get every single homework assignment done simply because if you're working on a bus, it's very difficult to work on a bus. And you go through a lot of neighborhoods from 119th all the way to Lincoln Park. And a lot of those neighborhoods are not super high quality neighborhoods, where more or less like when you are on that commute, you need to be on your guard. I worked in another school that was on the west side, and it was in the North Lawndale neighborhood. That neighborhood is known for being very rough and tumble and very challenging and in some respects very dangerous. And it's one of those neighborhoods that my students did not walk down the street unaware of what was going on. They had to keep their wits about them. They couldn't just chill as much as we can relax sometimes in our own homes. And I needed to recognize that. I needed to be cognizant of that when I was interacting with my students and when I was grading their assignments as well. So I couldn't just be a tyrant in certain things, and I had to show grace. And again, when I show grace, I don't mean lowering the bar for them. I don't mean making things easier for them. But what I do mean is reaching out to that student more and reaching out to that family more and being as invested in their education as their parents are. Now, some of you may be thinking that, oh, my parents don't care about my kids' education. I find that to be patently false. Their parents do care about their education, but their parents are also in the same boat of having to work their own jobs and provide for their families and take care of their families when the kids get home. And a lot of these students, a lot of my students I know, at least, they are not only children. And many of them have younger brothers and sisters, and I mean way younger brothers and sisters. So if I don't always get an email back from a parent, I need to also remind myself like, oh yeah, you know what? They have a toddler in the home. I currently have a toddler in the home, and I know I have just the one kid. If I had to balance a toddler with a teenager, my goodness, I would not be able to get anything done. And so I needed to recognize that and really see those things and understand those things. And again, be willing to show grace in that regard. So think about these things, because you carry a lot of power in your hands. And don't take this job lightly in that regard. Because again, what you're putting down does influence that child's future. So sorry to end this on such like a sour sounding note. But it is the weight of the responsibility that we bear. So I hope you have a great winter break. Hopefully, I encourage you still listen to the podcast over winter break. I'm still going to be releasing episodes. So even if you don't listen over winter break, you're going to have at least a backlog to come back to. So be sure to follow and like us on Facebook at Morning Prep Pod. If you have a question or an episode to suggest, you can send them in an email to morningpreppod@gmail.com. I'm planning on wanting to do a Q&A episode down the road. So please send those questions in. I look forward to reading them. I look forward to composing responses. I look forward to doing just a whole episode dedicated to your questions. So do that. This was the Morning Prep. Let's try that again. This was the Morning Prep Podcast. The bell is about to ring. I will see you in the classroom. Have a happy holidays.